Macon Black drove into the endless rain of the North Cascades, seeking peace, but his dog, Radar, found only danger. The moment his paws touched the mud, the Silver Shepherd froze, hackles rising like a blade as he snarled at the empty fog. He was not tracking an animal, he was sensing a lethal secret buried in the earth. Macon came here to hide, but Radar knows they have just walked into a kill zone. Welcome to Veteran Honor Chronicles. We invite you to gently press the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to honor these brave souls. Now, let us step into the storm. The old Ford pickup rattled and groaned as it climbed the winding gravel road, its headlights cutting weak yellow tunnels through the pervasive gray fog. Rain slicked the windshield, a constant rhythmic drumming that had followed Macon Black all the way from the highway turnoff. This was Mistwood, a place where the sky seemed perpetually weeping, and right now it matched the storm inside Macon, his chest perfectly. Macon shifted gears, his hand rough and scarred against the worn knob. He was a man composed of sharp angles and silence, his silver hair pulled back in a tight ponytail at the nape of his neck. Under his faded military field jacket, he wore a red flannel shirt that had seen better decades. He was seeking the end of the line, a place where the noise of the world and the memories of the desert sand could not reach him. He had bought the old ranger station site unseen, hoping its abandonment would mirror his own need for isolation. The truck lurched to a halt in front of the cabin. It was a dark, brooding structure of moss-covered logs and wet stone, looking as if it were slowly sinking back into the earth. Macon killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the hiss of rain on hot metal and the distant roar of water. He opened the passenger door, and a gray shape launched itself into the damp air. Radar landed silently on the carpet of pine needles. The German Shepherd was a creature of rare beauty, his coat a unique blend of silver and sable that made him look like a ghost drifting through the timber. He was more than a dog. He was Macon his anchor, the only living thing that could pull him back when the nightmares of the past threatened to drown him. Macon stepped out, his boots sinking into the mud. "Let us stretch our legs, Radar," he murmured, his voice raspy from disuse. They walked toward the sound of the water, heading north where the property line dissolved into the dense ancient forest. The roar grew louder, marking the location of Blind Falls. It was a place of raw, natural power, but as they approached the creek feeding the falls, Radar changed. The dog, usually a picture of disciplined calm, suddenly stiffened. He stopped dead in his tracks, his ears pinning back against his skull. The hackles along his spine rose in a jagged ridge of tension. A low, vibrating growl rumbled deep in his chest, not a sound of aggression, but of deep, primal warning. Macon froze, his hand instinctively going to his side. "What is it?" he whispered. He scanned the tree line for bears or cougars, but Radar was not looking at the woods. The dog was staring intently at the water, his nose working furiously, testing the damp air. To Macon, the air smelled only of pine resin and wet earth. But to Radar, the breeze carried a sinister cocktail. It was the sharp sting of acid and the rotten stench of sulfur, a chemical trail invisible to the human eye, but screaming danger to the animal. The creek was not just water, it was carrying poison. Radar moved away from the bank, whining urgently, and pawed frantically at the base of a large Douglas fir tree that looked strangely scorched near the roots. He looked back at Macon, his amber eyes wide with an intelligent, pleading intensity. He wanted Macon to see. Trusting the dog implicitly, Macon knelt in the mud. He brushed aside the wet needles and began to dig where Radar had indicated. The earth was loose, as if it had been disturbed not long ago. His fingers brushed against cold metal. He pulled harder, unearthing a heavy olive-drab steel box. It was a military ammunition can, sealed tight against the elements. Macon sat back on his heels, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. With a grunt of effort, He popped the latch. The lid sprang open. There was no ammunition inside. Instead, resting on a bed of dry cloth, lay a weather-beaten field notebook and a coiled leather object. Macon picked up the notebook first. The handwriting on the first page was hurried, almost frantic. It read, "The mountain is dying. They are killing it from the inside." He set the book down and reached for the leather coil. It was a dog collar. As he unfurled it, his stomach turned. The leather was stiff and stained with a dark, crusty substance that Macon recognized all too well. It was dried blood. Radar let out a mournful sound, pressing his head against Macon's shoulder. Macon realized then that the silence he had bought was a lie. The mountain was not empty. It was holding a secret, and that secret was buried in blood. The rain from the previous night had settled into a fine, suspended mist that clung to the pine trees like wet wool. Macon Black stood on the rotting porch of the ranger station, a mug of black coffee warming his scarred hands. The silence of the morning was shattered by the crunch of heavy tires on gravel. A white SUV with the gold emblem of the Hemlock County Sheriff Department rolled to a stop in the mud. The door opened, and a large man stepped out. Sheriff Roy Carver adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and offered a smile that seemed practiced, a mask of rural hospitality that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. At Macon's knee, Radar went rigid. The German Shepherd did not bark. Instead, a low, tectonic rumble vibrated through his chest, audible only to those standing close. The silver fur along his spine stood up in a sharp ridge. Macon placed a calming hand on the dog's neck, but he felt the tension rippling through the animal's muscles. Radar was reacting to something Macon could not perceive. The dog's nose, sensitive enough to detect a drop of blood in a gallon of water, was flooded with a sharp metallic scent radiating from the sheriff. It was the smell of adrenaline and cortisol, the chemical signature of a man preparing for violence. To Radar, the smiling man smelled like a predator coiled to strike. Macon's own instincts, honed in the deserts of conflict, picked up a different signal. As Carver walked up the steps, hooking his thumbs into his belt, Macon's eyes flicked to the sheriff's hip. The leather safety strap on Carver's holster was unbuttoned. It was a small detail, easily missed by a civilian, but to a Marine, it was a screaming alarm. A peace officer on a friendly welcome call kept his weapon secured. A man expecting trouble cleared the path for a quick draw. "Welcome to Mistwood, Mr. Black," Carver boomed, his voice deep and resonant. "Just wanted to check in on our newest resident. These woods can be unforgiving to newcomers." "I manage," Macon replied, his voice flat and unyielding. Carver's gaze drifted past Macon toward the patch of disturbed earth near the creek where the ammo can had been buried. "See, you have been doing some digging. Be careful. Old mines, sinkholes. People disappear in this county, and sometimes they are never found." The threat hung in the damp air, heavy and unmistakable. That night, the darkness in the valley was absolute. Macon sat in the unlit main room of the cabin, the retrieved ammo can sitting on the table before him. He was not asleep. He was waiting. Radar's ears swiveled toward the back door. A soft scrape of a boot against wet stone echoed outside. Macon moved with the silent fluidity of a ghost. When the lock clicked and the door creaked open, admitting a shadowed figure, Macon was already positioned in the corner. He flipped the wall switch. The sudden light flooded the room. "Don't move," Macon commanded. The intruder froze. It was not a mercenary or the sheriff. It was a young woman, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. She was shivering, but her eyes held a fierce, desperate resolve that Macon recognized instantly. "I am not here to steal," she said, her voice shaking. Her gaze locked onto the olive drab box on the table. She stepped forward, ignoring the potential danger Macon posed, and reached inside the box with trembling fingers. She pulled out the blood-stained leather collar. "It was his," she whispered, clutching the old leather to her chest. "My father's dog wore this. They went missing together 8 months ago." Macon lowered his guard. "Who was he?" "A geologist?" she replied, looking up. "His name was Arthur. He found out Apex Environmental was pumping toxic sludge into the old mines. He had proof. Then he vanished." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not blink. "Sheriff Carver said it was a hiking accident. He lied." Macon looked at the woman, Corinne Hart. In the set of her jaw and the terrified bravery in her eyes, the present moment dissolved. For a heartbeat, Macon was not looking at a stranger in a cabin. He was looking at the face of Corporal Jackson, a young squad mate from years ago. Jackson had looked at Macon with that same desperate trust just before the mortar hit. Jackson had died because Macon had been too slow to act. The guilt that had followed Macon for years, the ghost that drove him to this isolation, suddenly shifted. Radar moved from Macon's side and walked over to Corinne. The great silver dog sat down and rested his heavy head against her knee, offering a silent comfort. Macon looked at the dog, then back to the woman. He could not save Jackson. That opportunity was gone, buried in the sand. But this woman was here now. "They will come for you if you stay out there," Macon said, his voice rough with emotion. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain shut. "My name is Macon. We are going to finish what your father started." The forest at night was a suffocating labyrinth of shadows and freezing rain. Macon led the way, his boots finding purchase on the slick, moss-covered stones with practiced ease. Corinne followed close behind, her breath hitching in the cold air, while Radar moved ahead of them, a silent silver phantom weaving through the undergrowth. They were heading toward the source of the chemical stench that had first alerted the dog. The destination was Blind Falls, a massive cascade of water that plunged over a granite cliff face hidden deep within the fold of the mountains. As they drew closer, the roar of the water became a physical weight, vibrating in their chests and drowning out the sound of the rain. Macon signaled for a halt. He tilted his head, listening intently. To an untrained ear, there was only the thunder of nature. But Macon heard the anomaly. Underneath the chaotic crashing of the falls, there was a rhythmic, steady thrum. It was a mechanical heartbeat, perfectly synchronized to be masked by the waterfall's volume. "It is not just water," Macon shouted over the roar, leaning close to Corinne. "Listen to the bass note. That is a hydraulic pump." They pushed through the final barrier of ferns and emerged near the base of the falls. The sight was a grotesque violation of the wilderness, hidden behind a screen of carefully planted spruce trees, a massive industrial pipe snake along the ground, disappearing into the dark mouth of an old mine shaft. The pipe vibrated violently, pumping a thick, dark slurry deep into the earth. This was the secret of Apex Environmental. They were not treating waste. They were injecting it into the mountain's veins, poisoning the water table for miles. A small prefabricated metal shed stood near the mine entrance, its windows dark. "That is the field control unit," Corinne said, pointing a shaking hand. "The shipping logs and flow data have to be in there." "Go," Macon commanded, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "Radar and I will watch your back." Corinne ran to the shed. The lock yielded to a heavy rock she found nearby, the sound of the impact swallowed by the waterfall. She disappeared inside. Minutes stretched into an eternity for Macon, standing in the freezing rain with his hand hovering near his waist. Finally, Corinne emerged, clutching a rectangular object wrapped in her jacket. It was a physical hard drive. "I got it," she said, her voice breathless with a mix of fear and triumph. "It is all there. Dates, chemical compositions, Carver's signature on the approval forms." "We need to move," Macon said. "Now." They turned to retreat, heading back up the slope, away from the poisoned mine. They had made it 50 yards into the tree line when Radar stopped abruptly. The dog froze, his body turning rigid as a statue. His head snapped toward a large hemlock tree to their left. He did not growl this time. Instead, he let out a sharp, piercing bark that cut through the night air. Macon spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness to follow the dog's gaze. Radar was not looking at a person. He was staring at a knot in the tree trunk about 7 feet off the ground. Macon stepped closer and saw it. It was not a knot. It was a lens, deeply recessed into a casing of bark-textured plastic. Radar had smelled the heat of the lithium battery pack reacting to the damp air, a faint chemical signature that did not belong in the woods. It was a high-end cellular trail camera, the kind used for security in remote locations. As Macon's light hit the lens, a tiny red indicator light blinked once and went dark. Macon's stomach dropped. There was no memory card to pull, no way to destroy the evidence. The camera had already triggered. "It sent the image," Macon said, his voice grim. "Carver knows we are here, and he knows who we are." The silence of the forest suddenly felt predatory. The secret was out, and the hunter had just been given their scent. The storm descended upon Hemlock County with the fury of a living thing. What had started as a cold rain transformed rapidly into a blinding wall of white, the wind shrieking through the valley like a chorus of lost souls. By the time Macon and Corinne stumbled back to the ranger station, visibility was reduced to mere feet. "We have to leave," Corinne shouted over the gale, rushing toward her SUV parked in the mud. She reached for the door handle, but the vehicle was listing heavily to one side. Macon shone his flashlight on the wheels. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber flayed open with deliberate precision. A gunshot cracked from the tree line, chipping the stone facade of the cabin inches from Corinne's head. "Inside," Macon commanded, grabbing her jacket and hauling her through the front door. He kicked it shut and threw the deadbolt. They were not just trapped by the weather. They were besieged. The cabin was plunged into darkness, save for the faint gray light of the snowstorm filtering through the windows. The wind howled down the chimney, a high-pitched, mournful wail that sounded terrifyingly like a dying man's scream. Another bullet struck the exterior logs with a dull impact. For Macon, the sound was a trigger. The cabin walls dissolved. He was no longer in the North Cascades. He was back in the scorching heat of a foreign desert, pinned down in a crater, listening to the mortar rounds creeping closer. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. He slid down the wall until he hit the floor, his rifle clattering from his grip. His hands shook violently, the tremors radiating up his arms. He tried to reach for the ammunition box, but his fingers refused to obey. The panic was a cold tide, rising to drown him. Corinne saw him crumble. "Macon?" she whispered, fear trembling in her voice. But Radar was already moving. The Silver Shepherd did not bark or whine. He understood this enemy. He stepped over Macon's legs and pressed his entire body weight against Macon's chest. It was a grounded, heavy pressure, a technique known as deep pressure therapy. The dog forced his head under Macon's chin, his warm, rough tongue licking the side of Macon's face, breaking the sensory overload of the flashback. The weight of the animal was an anchor. The warmth was real. Macon blinked, the desert fading back into the shadowed timber of the cabin. He looked down into Radar's amber eyes, which held a calm, steady demand. "Stay here. Stay with me." Macon took a shuddering breath, burying his hands in the dog's thick ruff. The shaking subsided. He looked up and saw Corinne pressed against the far wall, her eyes wide with terror. She looked so much like Corporal Jackson in those final moments. "I won't lose another one," Macon thought, the resolve hardening in his chest like steel. He pushed himself up, the soldier replacing the victim. "Stay low," he ordered softly. Macon moved with renewed purpose. He smashed a mason jar on the floor and carefully lined the windowsills with the jagged shards. He strung high-tension fishing line across the doorways at ankle height. He was turning the sanctuary into a gauntlet. Hours bled into the night. The storm raged on, masking the sounds of the approaching mercenaries. Suddenly, the glass of the kitchen window shattered inward. A dark figure vaulted over the sill, boots crunching on the glass shards. Before Macon could bring his rifle to bear, the intruder lunged at Corinne, who had been hiding behind the counter. The man grabbed her by the hair, yanking her up as a long, serrated knife flashed in his other hand. "Drop the gun!" the man snarled. Macon froze, but Radar did not. The dog launched himself from the shadows, a silver blur of silent fury. He did not go for the leg or the throat. He targeted the weapon arm. Radar's jaws clamped onto the man's forearm with a full, bone-crushing grip. The mercenary screamed as the pressure of the bite forced his hand open. The knife clattered to the floor. Radar held fast, his body hanging in the air, shaking the man with the ferocity of a wolf protecting its pack. The screaming wind finally died as the first bruised purple light of dawn touched the jagged horizon of the Cascades. The sudden silence was heavy and terrifying, signaling the end of the blizzard. Macon knew this was their only window of opportunity before Carver regrouped. "We move now," Macon whispered, his voice hoarse. They abandoned the cabin, leaving the incapacitated mercenary bound on the floor. The trek to Widow's Peak was a brutal ascent through thigh-deep drifts of fresh snow. Macon led the way, his breath pluming in the freezing air, while Radar limped slightly, exhausted but unyielding, flanking Corinne. At the summit, the fire lookout tower stood like a skeleton against the lightening sky, a glass-walled box perched on steel stilts. They scrambled up the icy metal stairs, their boots ringing out in the quiet morning. Inside, the tower was freezing. The radio equipment was ancient, the power indicators dead. Corinne dropped her pack and pulled out her knife. "The batteries are dead, but the solar bank on the roof should have a charge," she said, her voice tight with panic. "I can bypass the regulator and hotwire the transmitter directly to the bank." "Do it," Macon commanded. He moved to the trap door, his rifle raised, watching the stairs below. Corinne worked frantically, stripping wires with her knife and twisting them together. Sparks showered down as she made the connection. A static hiss filled the room. She began tapping out the distress coordinates, her fingers flying over the keypad. Heavy boots clanged on the metal stairs. Macon leveled his rifle at the open trap door. Sheriff Carver rose through the opening, his face a mask of exhaustion and cold rage. He held his service pistol with a steady hand. "It is over, Black," Carver wheezed, his eyes darting to Corinne and the radio. Macon pulled the trigger. A hollow metallic click echoed in the small space. He had lost count of his rounds during the siege. He was empty. Carver grinned, a bloodless, cruel expression. "You picked the wrong county to play hero in." He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Macon's chest. The gunshot shattered the morning silence. But the bullet did not find Macon. A streak of silver-gray fur launched from the side of the room. Radar had anticipated the act of violence before the trigger was even pulled. He leapt across the line of fire, his body fully extended. The heavy slug slammed into the dog's shoulder, twisting his body in midair. Radar hit the floor hard, a pained yelp tearing from his throat. But he did not stay down. With blood blossoming dark against his silver coat, he scrambled to his feet on 3 legs. He placed himself between the gunman and his master, his teeth bared, a low, defiant growl rumbling from his chest. Carver cursed and adjusted his aim, ready to finish the animal. At that exact moment, the sun breached the eastern ridge. Simultaneously, a thunderous, rhythmic beating shook the glass walls of the tower. A blinding white light pierced the cabin, magnified by the rising sun. A black helicopter roared up from the valley floor, hovering level with the peak, the wind from its rotors whipping the snow into a frenzy. The letters FBI were stenciled in white on the fuselage. "Federal agents, drop the weapon!" A voice boomed from the loudspeaker, amplified over the roar of the engine. Blinded by the sun and the sudden appearance of the hostage rescue team, Carver staggered back. He dropped the gun, raising his hands in defeat as red laser sights danced across his chest. Macon fell to his knees beside Radar. The dog laid his head in Macon's lap, his breathing shallow but steady. Macon pressed his hands over the wound, his tears mixing with the blood on his friend's fur. "Stay with me, buddy," he whispered. "You are not done yet." 6 months later, the summer sun bathed the valley in a warm, golden light. The snow was gone, replaced by vibrant wildflowers. The old ranger station had been transformed. A new sign hung over the gate: Mistwood Search and Rescue Training Center. Macon stood in the center of the grassy field, watching a group of young dogs navigating an agility course. Beside him stood Corinne, holding a clipboard. They watched as a young golden retriever hesitated at a tunnel. A large Silver Sable German Shepherd trotted over to the puppy. Radar moved with a slight hitch in his gait, a permanent reminder of the metal plate in his shoulder, but his spirit was unbroken. He nudged the puppy gently, barking a soft encouragement. The puppy gathered its courage and ran through. Macon smiled, resting his hand on Radar's head. The ghosts of the past were gone, replaced by a future built on loyalty and survival. They had found their way home. Macon went to the mountains seeking silence to bury his ghosts, but he discovered that true peace is not found in isolation, but in the unwavering loyalty of a friend willing to face the darkness by our side. It reminds us that even when we feel broken, we are never truly alone if we open our hearts to the quiet devotion of a companion like Radar. If this story of courage and healing resonated with you, please gently hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments, as every interaction helps us bring more of these hidden tales to light. The journey of resilience continues, so please click the video that has just appeared on your screen to explore another powerful bond that defies the odds.